I call this hearing to order. Good afternoon and welcome to the panel, and thanks for joining us today. This committee is charged with oversight of all federal spending, which we accomplish through hearings like this one and through regular reports that are provided by various agencies that also help us to oversee government and its spending. Today we're examining spending at the Federal Emergency Management Agency and the need to make reforms in that spending. Given that our government borrows about $1 million every minute and has a $19 trillion debt, we just can't afford to allow waste to persist in government. Waste at FEMA and grant programs administered by FEMA has been described in detail by Senator Coburn, the GAO, the DHS Inspector General. One of our witnesses today, Inspector General Roth, found in a report issued today that Maryland bought nearly $70,000 worth of computer equipment that it did nothing with for nearly a year and a half. In 2012, Senator Coburn reviewed one FEMA grant program and concluded, the program is struggling to demonstrate how it is making the U.S. cities less vulnerable to attack and more prepared if one were to occur, despite receiving over $7 billion in federal funding. After 10 years, a clear danger for the Urban Area Security Initiative grant program is that it would be transformed from a risk-based program targeting security gaps into an entitlement program for states and cities. I think that risk still exists and that many states are supplanting some of their typical expenditures that they would commonly pay for themselves with federal money. I don't think to this date we've adequately corrected the deficiencies that Dr. Coburn found. Just last month, Inspector General Roth also released a report that had 333 recommendations for reform to the grant programs at FEMA, however, only found that 4 permanent changes that had been made to FEMA over the time in which these recommendations had come forward. Despite recommendations for reform over a nearly 5-year period, little in the way of reform appears to have occurred. We had a hearing on this in 2013 in which we went through some of the various forms of waste that were occurring at FEMA. But even since that hearing, we still continue to have problems. $280,000 was recently spent for a Bearcat armored vehicle in Dover. Well, the last time we were around, we complained of a $600,000 Bearcat armored vehicle for Keene. I guess New Hampshire's ready for the next invasion. We also found recently, or the inspectors have found, $1.7 million for unused radios and generators in Hawaii, and $174,000 for unused radios in D.C. This is since we last met to talk about waste. Every dollar wasted makes a difference to taxpayers. Right now, FEMA is more than $20 billion in debt because of the flood insurance program. Disaster spending often far outpaces the annual funding Congress provides, leading to the need for supplemental funding every year or so. FEMA has provided more than $40 billion in preparedness grants since 2001. These grants flow primarily to state and local agencies who all too often seem to be using these funds for things they would never purchase with their own money, such as the 13 snow cone machines former Senator Coburn found were bought by some Michigan counties. Small communities are using these funds to buy armored vehicles. Local communities love federal grants because they don't have to tax their local constituents to pay for the spending. The federal government simply hides the grants in the massive $19 trillion debt. For this reason, we must be diligent in insisting that local communities' needs be largely paid for by local taxes. A significant amount of this spending is also duplicative of grants available from other departments, such as the $650 million handed out to local police by the Department of Justice last year. I expect Inspector General Roth will give us much more insight into some of these problems today. I in my office hear a lot about FEMA from our constituents. The most frequent complaints are about flood maps. A neighbor of mine has a house out at the local lake, and his house is about, I think it's 60 feet above the level of the dam. And yet FEMA's map has him in the floodplain and requires him to spend money on extra insurance, even though it's hard to conceive of how his house is going to flood when it's above the level of the dam that holds the water for the lake. I hear that the updated flood maps aren't clear enough for county officials to make fully informed decisions. I hear that it takes far too long for counties to receive reimbursements for disaster recovery work. Perhaps if we weren't buying Bearcat armored vehicles for local police forces, we might have more money to take care of some of these problems. I'm eager to hear what our witnesses have to say, but I would certainly welcome any comments at this time from our ranking member, Senator Baldwin.